Daniel Haqiqatjou thinks child marriage is the morally acceptable answer to pubescent sexual expression and is beneficial from an evolutionary perspective. He's wrong on both counts. Let's have a chat. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. Thank you for the influx of subscribers, just 230 to go. Recently, Daniel debated Michael Jones, Inspiring Philosophy, on modern day debate on this issue. Michael addressed this from a moral perspective, as that was the way the question was framed, and did a great job. A link to the full debate is in the description, and portions of it will be included here. Daniel makes the argument that from an evolutionary standpoint, child marriage makes sense, as it allows for the greatest chance of creating more offspring and passing down one's genes. He focuses this argument more in his video Debunking 7 Main Reasons Why I Left Islam by Masked Arab, made 4 years ago.
In every culture, every pre-industrial, pre-modern culture, this was a very common practice. And so no one ever pointed this marriage of the Prophet ﷺ to Aisha radiallahu anha as something immoral or something that was problematic. And you have to really understand what the practice really is, okay, of marrying, of a man, older man marrying or having sex with a 9-year-old or 10-year-old prepubescent girl. And the thing is that in the vast majority of history, life expectancy was relatively low, infant mortality was considerably high, and so therefore it was necessary to use the extent of the fertility window for reproduction. And what psychologists say today, evolutionary psychologists, say that this practice is actually evolutionarily adaptive.
But sadly for Daniel and the claims of his religious beliefs, he is just wrong. You'll note that in the next clip, he never cites any of these alleged evolutionary biologists that he claims support his point, nor does he cite even a single source to back his claim. On the contrary, Richard Dawkins, an evolutionary biologist, in the book The Selfish Gene, Chapter 7, Family Planning, argues quite the opposite. He argues that in nature, animals practice birth control, though they don't realize that they are doing this. There is an optimum point at which the expenditure of energy of the parent in feeding and caring for offspring maximizes perpetuation of the species. For example, in many species of birds, parents work almost non-stop feeding their young after hatching. If the parents work themselves to death, then neither the parents nor the young survive. Thus, birds that have a gene for laying more eggs in a clutch than are sustainable will not survive to pass down that gene. Birds that are genetically predisposed to laying fewer eggs than they can reasonably care for and raise will perpetuate their genes, but at a lower rate than birds that lay the optimal number of eggs that can all survive to adulthood. Thus, evolution has a natural form of family planning and birth control built into it. The same holds true for the optimum time for marriage and child-rearing in humans. If the goal is to raise the maximum number of offspring, which I don't accept as a goal, but if it was, child marriage is a genetically inferior way to go about it. As Michael Jones points out in the debate, maternal and infant mortality is higher in underage girls. In the case of infant mortality, the time and energy spent by the girl in gestating the offspring that will not likely survive is wasted. From an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense to use the available resources to support the more sustainable offspring, those born to women in their 20s and 30s. For the mother, it is an even greater advantage genetically to wait. A young girl that dies bearing a child can bear no more children. Thus, waiting until a woman's body is fully developed and ready to bear children in her 20s and 30s will result in more offspring being born than by starting at a young age and risk not being able to bear any children at all. The death of the child bride, from an evolutionary standpoint, not only wastes the life of the young bride and all of the children that she could have borne, but it also wastes the time and energy invested in the child bride by her parents, whose genes also will now not be passed on to grandchildren. So, from an evolutionary standpoint, Daniel is just wrong. Not only is the species not optimized in the numbers of children by child brides, it is also not optimized in the best uses of resources for perpetuation of the species.
That this is something that is adaptive if we consider Darwinian evolution. I don't accept Darwinian evolution, that's a whole different topic. But for some of these atheists who do accept evolution, then this is something that was practiced and it was considered evolutionarily adaptive.
I included this primarily so that you could see that not only does Daniel fail to support his prior claim, he simply compounds the issue by making more unsubstantiated claims. As to this claim, it is possible that prior to modern medicine, there was some advantage in girls marrying earlier and taking the risk of maternal mortality in hopes of a longer childbearing career, so to speak. But even if this was the case historically, and I'm not convinced that it was, it is more likely that people found this intuitive, just as Daniel does here, and followed this practice, even though in reality, from an evolutionary goal of perpetuating the species, waiting would have resulted in the greater return on investment in resources used to pass down the genes and increase the population. However, even if there was a time when child brides were beneficial from an evolutionary standpoint, one certainly cannot make that case today. With modern medicine, infant mortality and maternal mortality is significantly reduced. But again, the reduction is far greater for mature women than it is for immature girls. Thus, to protect the investment of the parents in the girl, it is best that she waits until age 20 for childbearing to ensure the greatest number of sustainable offspring that she can produce. Evolution is about adapting to the changes in the environment. A species that adapts well to change or changes with its environmental transformation is more sustainable than a population unable to adapt. Therefore, even if Daniel were right about the historical advantage of child brides, that is no longer the case. And from an evolutionary standpoint, it is practice best abandoned if one wants to perpetuate the species in the most efficient manner.
Just a quick disclaimer that we are debating religious doctrine, history, and ethics. Nowhere am I advocating people break the law. I strongly advise everyone to follow your local laws.
This is how Daniel began his debate with Michael. While I'm glad Daniel advocates for following the law, if he really thinks that his God wants Muslim men to marry children, it shouldn't matter if it's against the law. Should your God's will not trump any local law to the contrary? Recognition that local law comes before your religious beliefs should tell you that your morality might be influenced by your religious beliefs, but aren't the most important thing to you, nor are your beliefs based on absolutes.
Many are appalled that we're even having this debate, and those people probably have a hard time imagining how anyone could ever think that marriage to a minor is acceptable. But the reality is all people historically considered minor marriage perfectly normal.
Why would this matter? Historically, people considered slavery normal. Historically, people considered bloodletting as a form of medical treatment normal. Historically, people considered killing other people for sport normal. I don't base my morality on what ancient people considered normal, nor should you.
Puberty is an extended process lasting from 2 to 5 years. The start of puberty also varies. It usually begins between 8 to 13 in girls or 9 to 15 in boys.
Puberty starting at age 8 doesn't mean menses begins at age 8. It means this body is beginning to go through the changes for physical maturation, not that maturation is complete. When you couple this with Daniel's claim that the process can take as little as 2 years, you would have fully developed women at age 10 being a normal thing. This is not the case. Menses usually begins 2 years after the first signs of puberty. The onset of menses is not the end of puberty. It is just a step in the process, as Michael aptly pointed out.
Environments, 1% of girls have their periods by age 8 and 4% have them by age 9. This means that they have completed puberty by ages 8 or 9.
Even by your own stats, this is 3% of the population. The vast majority are still children. Why would you want to set your moral compass to declaring girls of marriageable age at a point where only a small fraction are even beginning to physically mature? Worse yet, while a few girls may be physically capable of reproducing at age 10, none of them are emotionally, educationally, or socially ready to be mothers at this age. They can't drive a car or be employed. They are incapable of caring for children. They are children. And of course, the biggest issue of all, they are incapable of making adult decisions, like the decision to have sex. This is why we protect children with laws like statutory rape laws. That a child is unable to consent to sex makes any sexual act with her a crime. Anyone marrying an underage girl should be dealt with as the criminal that he is. What's more, a mature man should not be desiring underage girls. If he is the one that isn't normal.
Overall, children complete puberty in the 8 to 15 age range and start experiencing sexual desires. Now here's the million-dollar question. How do children deal with those desires? I want all the opponents of child marriage to give us a practical solution for all the sexually frustrated minors out there.
The outlet you propose is even worse. First, you only advocate for marriage for underage girls, not boys. I watched to the end of the debate and Daniel's other video on child marriage, and nowhere does he ever advocate for child marriage for boys, only girls. If the issue you are addressing is giving children an outlet for sexual desire, then you should be advocating for 10-year-old boys to marry as well. How are you with a 10-year-old boy marrying a 30-year-old woman? Not that I'm advocating for this. This would be just as harmful to the boy as the marriage would be for a 10-year-old girl. Next, your solution fails to recognize what sexual desire in adolescence is. According to the National Institute of Health, the sexuality of adolescents is not only seen as immature, but as being qualitatively distinct from the sexuality of adults. Sexual desire, sexual arousal, and sexual function is almost entirely missing. Thus, forcing adolescents into adult sex at a time when all they are ready for is sexual exploration is not only inappropriate, it's downright harmful. You advocate for full adult sexual relationships for girls whose sexual desires do not go there. A 12-year-old girl is ready for a crush, not a husband. For those adolescents that do need a sexual outlet, masturbation is an acceptable option. What's more, marriage should not be seen as a sexual outlet. If a married man is feeling sexually attracted to a woman that isn't his wife, having sex with his wife might not satisfy that urge. What then? He marries another wife? What if he's homosexual? He's attracted to men. How is marrying a woman or a girl going to satisfy him? I sincerely doubt that your real concern here is to satisfy the sexual desire of pubescent girls. If it was, you should be advocating for pubescent boys to marry the pubescent girls, not grown men.
It's just become an accepted fact that children watch porn, so let's just teach them how to do it safely. The shocking news recently is that they've started to teach kindergartners how to masturbate.
He's most likely getting that from this article that says the Clark County School District in Las Vegas has recommended, under the new curriculum, children ages 5 through 8 would be taught that touching one's genitals to feel good is called masturbation, which may be going too far, but it is a far cry from doing as Daniel claims, and one parent claimed, of teaching kids how to masturbate. They are merely teaching the meaning of the word. What's more, this was only a proposal, and it did not go over well. It was not accepted. As to your claim that a solution is needed because kids are having sex and watching porn, doesn't mean that the solution is you should join them. If teaching children safe sex is inappropriate, engaging in sex with them is most definitely not a better solution.
Hopefully, all Muslims and Christians here agree that fornication, masturbation, and pornography are not acceptable solutions.
Why would one's religious beliefs affect whether or not masturbation is an acceptable solution? I don't recall any verses in the Bible dealing with masturbation. Thou shalt not touch thyself isn't there. If your moral code is a code of absolute morality, then it shouldn't matter what religious view I hold to as to whether masturbation is right or wrong. But since the Bible says nothing on the subject, I don't see any reason for Christians to have a problem with it. I know little about Islam, which is why I don't usually address it. But according to multiple sites, the Quran, like the Bible, never expressly forbids masturbation. Muslims find it implied here in that sexual satisfaction is sin if found in other than one's wife or one's slave woman. But why is this a problem for women? Since this verse obviously doesn't apply to women, as in Islam a woman has no wife or slave woman to pleasure herself with, it would seem that women have no reason to abstain from masturbation. And since your proposal of child brides is only supposed to satisfy the sexual desires of underage girls, this seems to be a perfect solution to your problem. This article says the Muslim problem with masturbation for men is because of the physical, mental, and psychological harm it does to the human body. First, how does one do psychological or mental damage to a body? As to physical harm, where is it? When has anyone ever been physically harmed by masturbating? The claim by the church that you would go blind was made up entirely because there was no physical harm from masturbation. Because it causes no harm, they had to make one up so that they could claim it to be harmful. Not only is it not harmful, there are medical benefits to masturbation, which just goes to show if your God has a problem with masturbation, either your God doesn't understand human sexuality or your God doesn't have your best interests in mind. It could be both.
Both. Both is good.
I'll go with both.
These practices destroy the moral fabric of society and corrupt the soul. But the problem actually goes much deeper.
Daniel makes a lot of claims without supporting any of them. Where is the societal detriment? Is it a significant detriment? How is this detriment measured? Are souls real? How do you know?
Sadly, much of the sexual activity for minors involves sexual abuse. According to the data, 28% of American children ages 14 to 17 have suffered sexual abuse. Some of this happens in churches, but the majority happens in public schools. According to reports, the sexual abuse of students in schools is more than 100 times the abuse in churches.
Actually, most sexual abuse occurs in homes, either the child's home or the perpetrator's. Next, this statistic he is citing is inaccurate. The methodology is flawed as the incidence for schools was counted by self-reporting by anonymous students checking boxes if they were ever molested or made to feel uncomfortable at schools. The stats for the churches were reported by the churches of those cases where someone had came forth and made an allegation to the church. Thus, the stats for the schools would include incidents that were never reported or investigated, unlike the church stats. What's more, it's based on raw numbers of kids going to school versus kids who either themselves or a parent for them made a complaint against the church. Since there are more than 100 times as many children in public schools as there are children in Catholic churches, if the rate of sexual abuse were the same, one would expect the raw numbers to be 100 times higher for the schools.
By 11th grade, 10% of children have been sexually abused in school.
How did we get so derailed? I thought we were talking about child marriage. If his claim is that children are abusing other children in schools, and that most definitely is happening, how is marrying off the girls going to solve this? Do you think the boys will leave them alone for fear of the girls' husbands? Not likely. First, if the boys really must have a sexual outlet, as you claim, making pubescent girls marry won't change this. Next, in your faith, a girl who is sexually abused is seen as damaged by her husband. She isn't going to tell her husband. Her husband is likely to blame her and punish her for it. If anything, marrying her to an older man makes her even more a target for abuse, as her silence is all but guaranteed. Finally, even if marrying off the girls in puberty took them out of harm's way from pubescent boys, where will the boys turn now? Prepubescent girls? Or do you propose sexual relationships with their teachers?
That means that in America alone, 4.5 million children are victims, and none of this includes other forms of sexualizing children like drag queen story hour.
Says the man in a dress. If you can debate in a dress, a man can read a book to children in a dress. Entertainers have been entertaining children in drag for decades. No one thought it was a form of grooming until recently.
The rise of pornographic educational material in school libraries, the sexualization of children's clothes, beauty pageants, and on and on. The point is, childhood sexual desire from puberty is an unstoppable biological force.
How is adults sexualizing children evidence of a sexual drive in children?
In history, people of all religions and cultures had another solution, and that solution is marriage. Marriage is the healthy, wholesome outlet for the natural sexual desire that humans start experiencing at puberty.
Again, child marriage is neither healthy nor wholesome. Michael did a good job of explaining this. I'll just play that from his opening.
They increase mental health issues, stunt social development, lead to immoral acts like spousal abuse and suicide, and can even lead to physical harm and death. So it should be clear to every reasonable person there's no moral justification for child marriages.
Yes. So all religions and cultures have had this solution of marriage, but what changed? Why is minor marriage now seen as this unspeakable crime?
Simple. We came to realize it isn't healthy. It doesn't promote either well-being or increase the population. The best way to help our species to flourish is to wait on marriage. Once we realized that though this is counterintuitive, it is reality, we changed our laws and our norms to reflect this newfound understanding. This same reasoning is why we abolished slavery, gladiator games, and witch hunts. When something isn't working, you get rid of it. You compound the problem by subjecting the girls to sexual experiences and pregnancies they are not ready for. You subject the boys to the loss of the girls their own age with whom they can explore sexuality through normal means, like hand-holding, dating, and kissing. This is an issue that Michael doesn't address in the debate. Likely he didn't have time.
To answer this question, let's look at the history of child marriage in the West. According to ancient Jewish norms, a man can marry and have sex with a girl as young as 3. This ruling is found in the Talmud and is based on the precedent set by the Jewish prophet Isaac, who married Rebekah when she was 3 and he was 40.
This was a new one on me. Most Jewish tradition says Rebekah was 15, but there is a minority position that claims that she was 3. This is not part of Christian teaching. But again, it wouldn't matter what was done historically. The Israelites also allegedly committed multiple genocides. You aren't going to advocate for genocide as a historically acceptable norm, are you? Or slavery? Or owning women as property? If we reject these historical values as unhealthy, we can do the same for child marriage.
Take Exodus chapter 27, verse 7 through 11, which permits a father to sell his daughter as a slave, but doesn't stipulate a minimum age. So he can sell his daughters as slaves or as sex slaves from infanthood.
One more reason not to get your morals from the Bible.
Interestingly, this is where the Bible and the Quran actually differ, as the Quran doesn't sanction selling children as slaves.
Again, I am no expert in this area, but this Islamic teacher disagrees. Children can be taken as slaves according to the Quran. There is no age limit on the slaves, nor on when one can take a slave as a sex slave. This teacher does say a female slave needs to have her first period before the owner can have sex with her. But there is no limit on the age at which a female can be taken and held as a sex slave. So much for the superior morals of the Quran.
Many other sources, including archaeological evidence, prove that the common age for marriage in Judea at the time of Jesus was 13. This is significant because Jesus' views on marriage would reflect those of his era, meaning that he would have endorsed marriage and sex with minors. We cannot find a single recorded statement from Jesus raising even the slightest objection to the child marriage that was happening all around him.
True, one more reason to reject Jesus as God. But let's be fair. We don't have a single recorded statement from Jesus on any topic. He hasn't come back and made us any YouTube videos. He didn't have a scribe writing down anything he said. He didn't leave anything written for us. So while you are correct that we don't have a single recorded statement from Jesus on this topic, we also don't have a single recorded statement from Jesus on any topic. And thus, we can't use Jesus as the moral standard for anything. And even if we could, why would we? Human morals have advanced significantly in the last 2,000 years. To argue for a return to ancient morality would be to deny the last 2,000 years of human advancement. Oh wait, that's exactly what you want us to do, isn't it?
Western governments gradually introduced mandatory schooling. This went hand in hand with mandatory increases in the age of consent and marriage.
Daniel would do well to study the history of the age of consent laws. It had little or nothing to do with industrialization and education, though the timing might lead one to think that. In the United States, raising the age of consent was one objective of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, a predominantly Methodist organization whose main goal was to make alcohol illegal. Raising the age of consent was seen as a means of protecting girls from prostitution, as the current age of consent in the United States was from 12 to as low as 7. A man who raped a child was free of any responsibility for the act if he simply claimed that she consented. The girl was then unemployable and unmarriageable, as no one wanted a fallen woman. Thus the girl was left with no other option than to be a sex worker. Raising the age of consent meant sex workers would need to be adults. Girls would no longer be forced into the profession. Worldwide, it was different organizations that pushed for such laws, but the motivations were similar, primarily to regulate sex work to adults only. While Daniel's plan wouldn't make life as bad for the girls as they would have been in the 1900s, as the cultural prohibitions against marrying a non-virgin or hiring a fallen woman no longer exist, he does propose ruining the lives of girls by forcing them out of schools and into marriages they may not want and most certainly are not ready for. Forcing underage girls into marriages and to bear children at an early age makes them poor mothers. They lack life experience and education in child-rearing and running a household that they could gain by waiting. What's more, women need sufficient education to be able to support themselves in the workplace. Even if the career choice of a woman is to be a stay-at-home wife and mother, her husband can, at any moment, die or become disabled. A woman equipped to support herself is a woman equipped to survive in society without the need of becoming a social burden. Allowing girls to be educated and reach adulthood before marriage makes them better wives, better mothers, and better able to handle any and all of life's challenges, and better members of the community.
But many may be surprised to hear that today, 25 states don't even have a minimum age of marriage. Between 2000 and 2018, there were 300,000 documented minor marriages in the U.S., with some brides as young as 10.
This is to our shame. We need to end this, not perpetuate it. Tennessee has recently proposed abolishing any age limit on marriage. Once again, we see our country moving backward instead of forward in promoting the well-being of our own people, especially girls and women.
So, industrialization changed attitudes towards child marriage. Feminism did as well. Feminism aims to empower women so that they have careers and status equal to men.
Yes, this is a good thing. It is as it should be.
This means banning early marriage for girls and encouraging them to stay in school for as long as possible.
Yep, both good goals. What's the problem?
The fear is that girls may lose out on a career because they got married early and had children. Feminists consider such women victims who have failed in life because they haven't achieved independence and career status equal to men.
Not failed, but not as equipped to handle life. A woman who wants a career as a wife and mother is fine, but again, all women need to be able to support themselves, as no one is guaranteed someone to support them in this career choice. Unless one is independently wealthy, one needs a fallback. I'm also waiting for the shoe to drop. Is Daniel's position that women are not equal to men? If it is, come out and say it. If you believe it, own it.
The feminist thinking was impossible in the pre-industrial era because the overwhelming majority of the populace, both males and females, had nothing resembling a career. Almost everyone did low-skill farm labor with no education. For most of history, there was nothing like career advancement, so it would have made no sense to insist that girls delay marriage to pursue career advancement.
Women were also accepted more as equals in some workplaces, as they worked alongside their husbands in the same job that their husbands worked. Whether they were farmers or merchants, men and women historically did the same work. Still waiting for him to own and defend that women aren't equal to men.
We can track the increasing Western hostility towards child marriage over time. One of the first examples is the famous 1748 work, The Spirit of Laws, by French liberal thinker Montesquieu. Montesquieu refers to child marriage as a type of domestic slavery. Montesquieu associates such marriage with hot countries in the South. This includes Muslim countries which had child marriage. So here in the mid-18th century, Montesquieu offers one of the first Western criticisms of child marriage in Muslim countries. Because of this growing liberal hostility, Western countries banned child marriage in the colonies they occupied, like India and North Africa. By the early 19th century, Western Christians magically discovered that their religion actually prohibits child marriage, despite 18 centuries of Christians engaging in it.
Yep, just like Christians magically discovering that their religion didn't allow for slavery or racism. What's your excuse, Daniel? Why do you want your religion to stick to what is proven unhealthy for the culture, instead of finding a new interpretation for your holy book to suddenly discover that your God isn't such a dick after all? Or is your position that your God is a dick and wants child marriage because your God doesn't care who gets hurt by his evil desires? He isn't going to own the equality. Coward. Daniel, men and women are equal. You aren't special just because you have male parts.
Causes psychological harm. It's interesting that pre-modern people understood trauma and the emotional damage that can come from certain sexual behaviors like sodomy and prostitution, but there's no evidence that anyone in pre-modernity viewed adult minor relations as traumatic.
So what? They didn't have a problem with a lot of things that we now know are wrong. Your desire to return to ancient morality is disturbing.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Do you want to bring back slavery, child labor, inquisition? Why this one area of ancient morality, but not others? The claim that ancient people didn't see the psychological harm of child marriage before the existence of the field of psychology is laughable. Of course they didn't. It hadn't been studied yet. To ignore the modern studies just because they weren't known 100 years ago would be like arguing that we can't treat anyone for cancer because 100 years ago we didn't know anything about the treatments for cancer. Daniel, in determining if there is any detriment to child marriage, try looking at modern studies.
Well, what if I'm wrong? I mean, anybody could be wrong. We could all be wrong about the flying spaghetti monster and the pink unicorn.
See, the evidence is there if you care to look. That all of these studies were done in the last 100 years does not make them invalid.
Child marriage is this objective and universal evil. Please explain why 99% of humanity throughout history was blissfully ignorant of this.
For the same reason that humanity was, until recently, blissfully ignorant of the ills of slavery. Because there was a small, powerful minority that benefited from this, the practice was forced on those who were harmed by it.
The Bible condemns homosexuality, which hasn't been as commonplace historically as child marriage. Was the author of the Bible simply ignorant?
Authors, not author. But yes, the authors of the Bible are just ignorant. And both you and the authors are ignorant when it comes to homosexuality as well. Unlike child marriage, there is no problem with homosexuality, which leads to another problem with your proposed solution. If the solution to sexuality in children is to marry off young girls to men, you leave the boys with no other options than masturbation, which you claim is evil, and homosexual sex, which you also claim is evil. You promote the very evils that you hope to deter.
Any country that denigrates marriage for adults will inevitably encourage sexual liberation and promiscuity for adults. Likewise, any country that denigrates marriage for minors will inevitably encourage sexual liberation and promiscuity for minors.
Prohibiting sex with minors doesn't promote promiscuity in minors. Kids will still be kids. And again, the solution is not for the adults to join them. I will leave you with one last clip from the cross-examination portion of the debate where you can see just how reprehensible Daniel's position becomes.
Is there anything in Islam that prevents you from, a man marrying a 5-year-old that started precocious puberty?
No, marriage can happen, you can arrange a marriage even as an infant, but that doesn't mean that sex is allowed.
But could a man have a marriage to a 5-year-old, consummate it if she started precocious puberty?
If she starts showing signs of physical maturity, then yes, that's permissible, as I stated. That's
what about
the
age
principle.
4?
If there are signs
3.
So this is something that becomes biologically impossible because precocious
I have
puberty,
a study
there are
that shows
no...
it goes as early as 11 months.
So an Islamic man can consummate a marriage to a 3-year-old if the 3-year-old shows signs of precocious puberty. No consent from the child needed. Clearly, Daniel's religion promotes satisfying the sexual desires of men, whatever those men might desire. Obviously, a religion by men, for men, and the God is only an excuse to manipulate women into giving the men what they want. One thing I can say for Christianity, at least it isn't as disgusting as Islam. Live your life. And this week, a fresh hot chocolate chip granny cookie goes to Data Jack. Thank you, Data Jack, for your comment. Live your life.